Welcome to the TVAD, which is Theorising Visual Art and Design Research Group, and our invited guest, Ljubomir Jankovic, who also teaches here at the University of Hertfordshire. So what you're getting now is some insight into current research going on in our university. Did I say my name? Anyway. I'll be chairing the questions afterwards, but in the meantime, you have Lubo's wisdom and pearls to impart. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much and welcome. This is also a design research talk as well, because my area is also design research. And before I start, I would just like to say something about Zero Carbon Lab. Zero Carbon Lab is a research group that I've established after coming here a little bit more than a year ago. And the group is looking into combining computational methods and design thinking to seek solutions to tough, open problems in the built environment. You might be asking what are open problems. These are problems which haven't been solved, so that's why they're open. And we are an inclusive group, so I'd just like to show this is me and my PhD students. One of them is here, Pavesh. They're looking at various aspects of improving building design, and we are an inclusive group. We would welcome other people to come in and join if they want to be affiliated with us. It doesn't need to be anything to do with buildings. So here you are. Just if you want to consider that when you have time and if it's appropriate. Okay, so deep simplicity of zero. Whatever does that mean? First of all, this photo was taken by Reed Wiseman, NASA astronaut from International Space Station. And the thin blue line here is in fact atmosphere above the Earth, and it is much thinner than you would think. It's very fragile. So this is the curvature of the Earth, and I think we need to be conscious of what is going on our planet in order to know how to deal with it. So this razor thin blue line above our planet is where everything happens, where we are. And now on to questions. What is deep simplicity? What is zero? And what happens if we combine the two? First of all, what is deep simplicity? This is complexity of system behavior arising from simple rules deep inside the system. And nature had 4.6 billion years to figure this out and has created these natural buildings. These are termite mounds, and these termite mounds have been developed on the basis of local rules, local interaction. But as a result of that, there is some global behavior, some system behavior that you wouldn't imagine from simple rules. There are a number of ducts inside, and this is where heat is generated, and there are also ducts going down deep in the ground. So these ducts supply air into the mound, and also these ducts allow access to water deep in the ground. So what happens is that solar radiation comes here, and it starts this process, hot air rises, so it starts a process of ventilation, natural ventilation through the mound. And if temperature isn't regulated within 1 degree Celsius, as this termite mound does, then termites go down deep in the ground and bring droplets of water on their bodies and regulate this part here, which is where heat is generated, where they live, regulate that further. So within 1 degree Celsius, this temperature regulation occurs without really any extra energy coming in and out. And this is within very harsh natural conditions where outside temperatures can be in excess of 40 degrees and during the day and during the night can be very, very low. Okay, so this is our explanation of deep simplicity. What is zero? Well, there are various definitions of zero. According to an author whose book was entitled Zero, this is a dangerous idea. It was born in ancient times in the East, and then it propagated into Europe with a bit of struggle. It is a twin of infinity. It's exception from the norm, singularity. And ancient cultures did not need zero when counting sheep or fruit, but as human mind developed and culture developed, zero became necessary. So it signifies development of human thought. And this author claims that underneath every revolution there was a zero, and zero shook foundations of philosophy and science and mathematics. And in 1997 it brought to a halt an 80,000 horsepower US warship through computer error, division by zero. The software just gave up. So, but zero also refers to a state of balance in a system between inputs and outputs, between gains and losses, and between production and consumption. And it also refers to a balance between carbon dioxide emissions and absorption. So, going back to this diagram here, we can see that natural systems, we can now unpack this. Natural systems create buildings that include self-organization, economic use of materials, local materials for building, forms that enhance air circulations, forms that maximize enclosed volume and minimize heat loss. It includes homeostasis, metabolic and solar gains are balanced with conductive, convective, and radiative and evaporative cooling. So there is energy efficiency without any auxiliary energy, no additional energy spent, not much carbon emissions, and is a balance with absorption from plants. Zero carbon design of a building is a method that achieves balance between carbon emissions and absorption, but it also provides good thermal comfort and positive return on investment. However, a majority of buildings are not designed with deep simplicity of zero balances in mind. We use fossil fuels, and that causes carbon dioxide emissions. And you can see from this heat balance that there's a complex number of phenomena going on here, energy inputs, energy outputs, heat gains and losses, and as a result of that you get carbon emissions here all being pumped into the atmosphere. And what happens then is the planet is getting warmer. Why is it getting warmer? You have carbon dioxide going to the top of the atmosphere here, and what happens is that when radiation, solar radiation comes in, as high energy radiation, short wavelength, it can go through anything. When it gets re-radiated, it becomes long wavelength, and it becomes, it coincides with the size of carbon dioxide molecules. So that's why this is bad to have carbon emissions, more and more of them, because less and less heat that would otherwise go out from the planet stays within the planetary system. As a consequence of this is that sea levels will rise, there will be coastal cities that will get submerged, the ecosystem will get out of balance, and humanity's survival will be threatened. That's why we need to improve the way how we design buildings. So how did we get here? There were two revolutions that brought us here. First, it was agricultural revolution, and then industrial revolution. Agricultural revolution occurred around 6,000 years ago when food production was established and surpluses were generated. So instead of being hunter-gatherers, people could specialize in non-food production activities, and that led to the development of complex societies and political systems. During that time, or as a part of this development, people designed buildings with natural materials. This is a series of photographs from Taos Pueblo in New Mexico, which has been around for more than 1,000 years. This Pueblo uses adobe as a main building material. There's about 300 days of sunshine at 2,100 meters of altitude in Taos. And adobe is non-fired sun-dried mud mixed with organic material. And there's a bit of straw as well. It is stabilized with lime and maybe cement. And consolidation is achieved by compression. And they resurface this material annually. So this is how buildings were designed. This kind of material filters outside weather very effectively. So inside, due to high thermal inertia of the material, inside feels warm when it's cold outside, and it feels cold, but not so warm when it's very hot outside. Also, in ancient Greece, this is Santorini. Island of Santorini, built from volcanic rocks. Well, all buildings are built from volcanic rocks. The buildings are built to breathe air. There are openings that allow air to breathe. There are very thick walls that filters climate conditions very, very effectively. It doesn't get very hot inside, but it's hot outside. And white color actually deflects solar radiation. So, according to Greeks, there are 4 elements of design. These are earth, fire, air, and water, and all of these are incorporated in this particular philosophy of design. But then, Industrial Revolution came around 250 years ago, driven by abundant coal, and that led to rapid development of technology to solve new types of problems, such as earth moving and mine construction and water pumping, and transport controlled combustions. And the consequence of that were that technology and commerce were elevated to a prominent position in society. As a result of that, buildings became machines that can defy the climate using fossil fuels. And this is how we have now got to a point that Industrial Revolution has changed human thought. It supports 7 billion people, around 7 billion people, more than 600 times the population before the agricultural revolution. It has brought about the paradigm of growth economy, but the planet doesn't grow to accommodate the continuous economic growth. And the consequence is that the total carrying capacity of the global environment has been cut. There's also another unintended consequence of all this. In European Union, there are 500 million inhabitants. There will be 60 million inhabitants less in about a month's time. 50 million of these, or 10%, live in fuel poverty. They can't afford to pay energy bills. And there are over 600,000 excess winter deaths estimated across the EU. So that sounds really horrible, that so many people live in fuel poverty, and we should have all the technology to eliminate that. So how do we design buildings? This is a building I was involved in near Portsmouth, and it is a nearly zero carbon building. It's not zero carbon because there wasn't enough money to finance it to have zero carbon performance. It has large openings on the south to allow solar radiation. It has green roof to protect excess heating during the summer. It has natural ventilation chimneys. The back of the building towards north is curved to minimize heat losses, and it has all the necessary ingredients for zero-carbon building, except it doesn't have renewable energy. So when we design buildings, we create computer models where solar radiation and weather and human activity influences the model. But the model is equation-based, and we get some outputs as a result of that. Now, as soon as you see that this is equation-based, then that means it's a top-down model. It is the whole system is defined with equations, and then we try to push and poke these equations and see what happens to the building. This is nothing to do how actually natural systems work. Natural systems don't do equations in order to know what to do, so we'll get to that in a minute. But we create, how do we design buildings? We create a simulation model, and most designers used to run these kind of models a handful of times for different parameters and for the appropriate climate every hour of the simulation year, every hour of the year, and then they get some results and they use that to design a building. But what we've started doing recently is creating this kind of scenario of different parameters so that we can change air tightness so many times and wall constructions and various other parameters. So when we multiply all these, we get something like 930 million permutations for a single design. And on a fast server, that would take probably 150 years to run. But we don't do that because we don't have time. What we're trying to do is find, if you imagine that this is, well, the model, the previous matrix has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 variables. So it's 11-dimensional space. But we cannot envisage 11-dimensional space, so we're going to represent it as 3-dimensional space of valleys and hills. And we are trying to find the optimum, either maximum or minimum on that hill. So we are trying to find this kind of thing. And we don't want to be in a suboptimum, in a local minimum. And the problem is, when we look around, if we're in this point, the horizon might look the same in all directions, so which way do we go to find this system minimum? What we do to overcome that problem, we use genetic algorithm, genetic operations. So we represent the building parameters as chromosomes, and then we split them according to well, in a similar way as it happens in nature. So we split them, we also mutate some of them, so we create children from parents by crossing over their chromosomes, and also by mutation of certain part of the chromosome. And then we go into survival of the fittest. We check all of them, see what the performance is, and then select the fittest to go into the next generation. So in terms of building simulation, instead of going from one point, we cover the entire solution space with all these chromosomes, and then crossover brings two chromosomes together in the middle, somewhere in the middle, and mutation takes it to another place of this solution space. In practice, this becomes our chromosome, and we then cut that in a random place and create children from parents. And then we get these kind of performance points where out of 930 million, we have actually, through this genetic algorithm approach, we have reduced that to some 600 points altogether, 600 cases, and only 3 of them are actually below 0 carbon. So this is the recipe that we can actually then move towards actual design. So we've done this with deep energy retrofit of buildings. This is an example of a real project that I completed about a year and a half ago. The building was made of concrete, and occupants weren't very happy in it. It was very dusty and cold. What we did, we actually checked heat losses here. You can see where bright colours are. This is where heat losses are coming through the walls. That's where radiators were inside the buildings. We then did 3D laser scanning and created this kind of model to pass on to the industrial partner to do the creation of external insulation panels. But at the same time, we created models of this building, and the models were converted from one type of simulation tool to another, in order to be able to do this optimization. So this is multi-objective optimization using the same kind of genetic algorithms that I talked about, and then we find an optimum solution. And this is the chromosome, the recipe that we pass on to the industrial partner for insulation thickness and various other parameters. And then they construct the building off-site, construct insulation off-site, and then deliver panels on-site, install them, and then you get from something like this to something like this, which doesn't look much different. But the reason for choosing this kind of design was that this seems to be in a socially deprived area, this building, and the local council didn't want it to stand out. So it looks the same, but it's not the same. It has almost 300 millimeters of thermal insulation. It is another building altogether. There are no chimneys anymore. It's much more efficient building. We've also had access, Zero Carbon Lab have had access to Birmingham Zero Carbon House, from which we collected a lot of information, monitored it over the past 5 years. And you can see that here there's air movement path defined by the architect. There are also high density floors that absorb solar radiation. You can see solar radiation coming in there. Similar thing as in a thermite nest, you have high density material and then natural ventilation. And then natural ventilation goes through the top floor and up through roof windows. But yeah, there's renewable energy such as solar thermal energy and wood burning stove and solar photovoltaic. There are high level openings everywhere, and that is the basis for good thermal performance and zero carbon performance. We measured it extensively with this instrumentation system, including solar radiation on the roof and temperatures inside and outside and so on. But considering that this is a zero carbon house and it is 160 kilograms of CO2 per year negative, so it is zero carbon negative. It has excellent thermal comfort. It has payback period of 8.6 years. Return on investment after 25 years is around £90,000 of tax-free money. And it is an example that zero carbon retrofit is possible with today's technology. By the way, zero carbon house, original house, was actually built when Charles Dickens was writing Christmas Carol. So it is that old, and it was converted into zero carbon. But it doesn't do everything what natural systems do. It doesn't do the design through self-organization. It hasn't been done like that. It does represent economic use of materials, local materials for buildings, forms that enhance air circulation, forms that maximize and close volume, minimize heat loss. But that is not included. That was not part of the design. Homeostasis is not quite represented in this house. not everything is balanced with conductive, convective, and radiant losses. And energy efficiency isn't achieved without auxiliary energy, but not much of CO2 emissions has been generated. In fact, CO2 emissions have been negative. So, can we therefore combine deep simplicity and zero balances to spontaneously mimic nature and improve the way how we design buildings? Can we do design through self-organization, economic use of materials, local materials, and all this that I've mentioned before? What triggered me to go onto a different path in this research was a paper by Craig Reynolds in 1987, which I discovered only about 10 years after that. And the paper was entitled Flocks, Herds and Schools. And what he did, he developed a computer model of a flock of birds based on only 3 interaction principles. And the flock itself actually formed by itself without any explicit programming. So let me bring that up. I think okay, this is School of Fish. Okay, this was done by a student when I was doing a bit of teaching of computer science, as well as teaching architecture. And there are 32 pieces of fish. This is an interactive model. I can grab it and let it go. What's interesting about this is that 32 pieces of fish interact with each fish interacts with each other fish in 3 different ways, plus with obstacles. That's 1 more way, and with a boundary. So that's 5 ways altogether. 32 pieces of fish. Imagine if we, and this is how to define the whole system. If we wanted to design this system, design this computer model in the same way as building simulation models are designed today, we would need to design every possible state of this model, and there are 5 to the power of 32 cases. If we say that these are seconds, just to give you an example or kind of feeling what that means. So that number here represents this many years. The age of the Earth is 4.54 billion years. The age of the universe is 13.75 billion years. This is hyper astronomic complexity of the model, but guess what? The model runs on my laptop. So why are we not doing these kind of models to design buildings, to design everything else? So that is how I got involved in a project that was about modeling of cities, of land use in cities, and we modeled 22 land use types, gave them certain type of metabolism. This is a road, and the road has attractiveness that dissipates outwards. And as a result of when we started this model, something very unexpected happened. And this is that land use cells, land use types, as the city expanded, as the model expanded, started following the road, but there was nowhere in this code, in this example, in this model, to say follow the road. There was also this kind of segregation of different land use types, where commercial and retail and residential were separated. We also got this kind of I don't know if you can see, very thin lines. So we got very bottom-up approach of creating local routes to other places rather than from the main road. And somebody told me this is how actually electricity lines are designed to go to these other remote cells away from the main routes. We also got the fitness diagram of the cells and the land use. And as you go towards the city centre, the emergent property which we didn't envisage was that we have a higher fitness in the city centre, which is what happens in city centres around the world, taller buildings. Okay, so I thought this was interesting, and I then started generating these fractal patterns. What else can based on the same kind of modeling idea as the city models. City models were based on land use types, each had metabolism, each had interaction with other land use types. So one Christmas, when I was not permitted to work by the family, I started playing with these kind of fractal patterns, and I just thought, okay, well, they look nice, maybe I'll just see what I can do. And actually that turns out to be something that Sean found of potential interest, so we might be applying this to colouring garments and things like that. So moving on from that, I actually thought, okay, maybe I'll try to do something else and generate animal pigmentation patterns, animals as can be, using the same idea of cellular interaction. And my little daughter was 6 at the time. I said to her, would you like to have a kind of picture of cow pattern for your room? And she said, yes, but can you make it pink? So I did that actually. So I parked this on one side for the time being, and it didn't do much with that. And then came across completely independently about some work by a bunch of scientists who found a termite nest somewhere in Africa, poured plaster into it, and when the plaster set, they jet washed it to see what is inside. And in another experiment, they actually brought a rig and sliced the nest horizontally, and got these slices, got the images of these slices. When I saw that, I thought there's something remarkably similar between these kind of patterns that I've developed just by playing, and these kind of patterns that termites make. And I thought, if I can generate patterns that look like cross-sections of termite nests using simple rules, can I generate dynamic simulation of how a real nest works? Because this is very difficult. And this is when I came to the idea of doing these kind of cellular automata models that are really like sketches that become alive. That's what I call them. So you create a model, you put a bit of heat in, and then you run it, and you see what happens. So I'm going to get one of these up and running now. And show you how that works. Okay, so this is an enclosure, and heat starts rising, and then I'm going to interact with that model. I'm going to delete some cells there, and then I'm going to add a chimney. can tell that I'm not an artist. And then I let the airflow go, and it's interactive. So, first question is answered. Yes, we can do design of buildings in this way. This is work in progress. It does need further development, but we can do that. And also, what we can do is we can generate a model of the termite nest and run it. So let's see, where is that? And I can do it quickly for you. Okay. Right, so we're going to run same cellular model. Okay, let's stop this and run it. Okay, so here's the cellular model, and I import the cells and start running. And so this is the organic shape, which is perhaps badly drawn. It's very difficult to run this with conventional simulation models, but nevertheless it is possible. It's actually very easy to do this in a non-conventional way. So I'll park this to one side and then continue with presentation. So it is therefore possible to run this, to create this kind of model on the basis of deep simplicity, where we can then interact and push and poke the model and do better buildings in the end. And what is very, very disturbing is that you can do this kind of thing with a conventional model. You can get flow pattern of air, but it's a static pattern, and it takes about 25 minutes to get it on the basis of these equations. And it doesn't do much, it is just static. These are Navier-Stokes equations, by the way, invented 150 years ago, for which direct solution, a total solution doesn't exist. So, this is how airplanes are designed, this is how many very safety critical systems are designed. And when we fly by an airplane, you can be absolutely sure that parts of that airplane are totally undesigned, because there's no solution to these equations. So if you want to know how air flows, you wouldn't ask air to do these equations. Air doesn't do these equations in order to flow. So what I've then done is I try to use bird flocking algorithm to also do airflow, and I created that model in a different environment, and we can start this, we shoot these pieces of air into the room, and instead of the static pattern that I showed you before, we get a very dynamic pattern where these particles of air, when they go down to the warm surface, they get heat, they change the color, they go to the cold surface, they lose the color, and they circulate, and they explore the whole space. And if we want to open the roof, then they will go out. Okay, so this is important to note because we can then create other models that help us design building shapes. I just need to get to stop this. And then we'll get on to the next model. Okay, let's okay. So another way that another reason why I got inspired about making buildings using emergent forms is this system called L systems, where you can create very complex looking plans on the basis of some simple rules. These are turtle commands: go straight, go left, go right, go at an angle. So there's, in this particular model, there's what they call an axiom, fx, and the rule for f is this, and the rule for x is that. So this is a formula, very simple formula. And when we go to that model, so this is a very simple looking plant, but if we change that to a little bit more complex plant, we get, sorry about this, when we change that to even more complex plant, or more iterations, we get more complex plant.
No need to apologize.
This is all planned. Okay, so going back to the presentation again. Can we do self-organized designs? Can building designs be made just like nature grows trees or other complex structures? Can we use simple rules to specify the ultimate form and function like nature design does with embryos? For example, nature has designed me and you in this way from very simple rules going from the bottom up. And I started playing with that and used attractors which propagate attractiveness into this three-dimensional space, and then start the system, and I get the configuration of our courtyard that is actually that represents a building or represents a formation of something that has the closest access to these points. So if this is a building, then you would have the closest access to these exits if you make a courtyard shape, and this is what people did before. If you take a vertical line of attractors, which you can't see now, and run the system, then you would get a shape of the building that has the closest, the shortest access to the vertical core, and there's a building like that. So let's see if we can create some other experiments. That create some interesting shapes. Okay. So this is a vertical core, and the attractors attract these balls, and you get a shape like this. And if we go to another type of model, now I've reversed attractiveness, made the attractors repellents, and I've created this kind of form. Now we can go and have a look what this is like. Okay, so the ultimate, the final model that I'm going to show is based on a recursive rule. These are all recursive rules, and the reason why we are doing recursive rules is because that happens with natural systems, with simple rules on a component level. This is deep simplicity. That's what deep simplicity is about simple rules and recursion. And in this particular case, we have a recursive rule that each component creates its clone, checks the position of the sun, gets as close to a place in the sun as possible, and it repeats the process. And let's see what we're going to get when we run that model. Okay, so I need to trigger some balls there, and I'll let it run. The sun is somewhere here, where we are, where we look from, and all these cells are duplicating themselves. They are color-coded according to the proximity to the sun. And the stopping criterion is when you reach a certain number of balls, or if you reach a certain number of square meters of the floor area. And this is what it looks like. It's a little bit like a horseshoe shape, trying to get sun from all possible sides as the sun moves around. So what does that all tell us then? This is the shape we got, but indigenous people from long ago figured that out some time ago. So this is Santorini, and it's made like that to capture the sun. So, self-organizing design. In order to get to deep simplicity, we need to study the rules of nature and interpret them for our needs. And deep simplicity of zero balances is everywhere around us. We have a collection of rules and good understanding of these processes. Increasing our understanding of nature will set us on the road of new discoveries. And there are no fundamental limitations to making self-organizing designs of buildings that integrate form and function from simple recursive rules. These buildings will inherit intrinsic characteristics of natural systems. And that will be the time when we will be able to take much better care of the razor-thin blue line above our planet. Thank you very much.